So Joe Biden gave his State of the Union speech the other day, and it was a barn burner. But how does it compare to Donald Trump's State of the Union speeches? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So after Biden completed his State of the Union speech, CNN did a poll, and what they found is that 72% of the viewers had a favorable impression of the speech. This seems to match other data that I've seen, where generally speaking, people had a very favorable reaction. You might say that they're chalking it up to the benefit of low expectations, but let's just compare and contrast that a little bit with President Trump's speech. Back in 2018, a similar poll following Trump's State of the Union speech found that he got the least positive reaction in at least 20 years, with only 48% of people saying they had a very positive reaction. That's the lowest net positive rating of the State of the Union address since 1998 when CNN first asked that question. So contrast 48% to 72%. Seems like Joe Biden did a little better there, don't you think? But one thing that seems to generate outrage among Republicans is when I say that Donald Trump is a liar, which just seems unbelievable to me that anybody would be surprised to hear that. I mean, the guy literally lies like he breathes. And Republicans, especially if you watch Fox News, you'd be convinced that Joe Biden's a liar too. But I think that's a bit of a stretch. I mean, again, let's compare and contrast the two State of the Union speeches. Here I have from the Washington Post the fact check of President Biden's speech this year. And here I have the Washington Post also, their fact check of Trump's 2020 State of the Union speech. Just as an initial take here, if you look at what the Washington Post says about Biden's speech, they say, a State of the Union address generally is a product of many hands and is carefully vetted, but State of the Union addresses are often very political speeches, an argument for the president's policies, so context is sometimes missing. So they say the worst thing about Biden's claims is that they were missing context, and they came up with 13 statements that they felt were worthy of some clarification. Let's contrast that with what they say about Trump's 2020 speech when they start out with President Trump's State of the Union speech once again was chock full of stretched facts and dubious figures. Many of these claims have been fact-checked repeatedly, yet the president persists in using them. Kind of a contrast. And again, you have 31 statements that the Washington Post felt needed to be addressed. So again, 13 issues with Biden's speech that seemed problematic versus 31 with Trump. And then the nature of the problems was quite different. Again, as the Washington Post stated, it seemed like context was missing. I mean, let's just go over some of these here. To the claim that, quote, I stand here tonight after we've created with the help of many people in this room 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president has ever created in 4 years. The only critique that the Washington Post can bring up about that is, well, that's largely because of the fact that the economy was recovering from COVID. And by the way, it's in 2 years, things might change. So they're not saying it's untrue. They're just saying, oh, you know, there's more context to it. Similarly, to the claim, we've already created 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. Their response is that the number of manufacturing jobs has rebounded since the pandemic started, but not until last May did the number of manufacturing jobs exceed the level of February 2020. So in essence, it took a while for that bounce back to exceed what we had pre-pandemic. They're not saying the claim is wrong, just that, well, you know, the pandemic kind of threw things up in the air and made this a little more complex than was presented in the speech. Similarly, the claim, for too many decades, we imported products and exported jobs. Now, thanks to all we've done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. And the points that they make here is that, yes, that's true, but the amount of imports have also climbed. So we actually still have a larger trade deficit, but exports have been increasing. So again, they're just saying that, oh, context was missing. Not exactly false, but you could have given more information. And then you see this a lot too, where there was a slight change in the numbers. Like, for example, America used to make nearly 40% of the world's chips, but in the last few decades we lost our edge and we're down to producing only 10%. Now here, they say that this statistic comes from the Semiconductor Industry Association, and they're saying that it eroded from 37% in 1990 to 12%. So rather than 40% down to 10%, 37% to 12%. Okay, so he rounded. It's not exactly right. And then this one shows that sometimes there's some controversy over how the numbers were argued. Like, for example, it says, we used to be number 1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. And there, they say that he's citing rankings from the World Economic Forum that cover 140 countries from all economic tiers. But then they argue that if you compare the wealth of the country and the size of the country, well, the United States isn't doing as badly as President Biden said they were. So again, not wrong, just maybe a little more nuance could have been added. And again, here's another one. It's not fair, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the biggest companies in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid 0 in federal income taxes. 0. And here, to quote the Washington Post, it's not necessarily wrong, but there are some limitations. So again, they're not arguing with anything that Biden has said. They just said, add in some context. Maybe he's taking a little too much credit for certain things, but nothing is wrong. That's essentially the same thing they say with, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. And they point out that, yes, that it was included in the Inflation Reduction Act, but some firms may be able to get around that. And similarly, where he made the claim that passed my proposal for a billionaire minimum tax because no billionaire should pay a lower tax rate than a school teacher or a firefighter, they say Biden's comparing apples and oranges here. Here's a claim where he talks about the deficit. And again, the Washington Post response is, this is technically accurate but lacks context. And on the claim that some Republicans are in favor of Medicare and Social Security to sunset, there he's referring to Rick Scott's proposal, which, to be fair, hasn't gotten a lot of traction. And Biden pointed it out. He said, I'm not saying it's a majority. And as the Washington Post said, that's putting it mildly. So again, not untrue, just maybe exaggerating a little. Here's another example of where the numbers were rounded. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of our American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we have broken COVID's grip on us. COVID deaths are down nearly 90%. Well, according to the Washington Post, that's a decline of 85%. So rather than 85%, he said 90%. Oh my goodness, can you believe that? And then on his claim regarding banning assault weapons and the statistics on that, the Washington Post says these claims are the subject of a dispute. So again, not incorrect, just that they're not exactly settled at this point. That's everything. Those are all the criticisms they had of Biden's speech. You'll note, not a single time did they say he did not tell the truth or this is wrong. They said that, some context could have been added. He was maybe exaggerating a little bit, maybe taking a little too much credit, maybe rounding numbers rather than using the exact numbers. I think all of those things are fair in what's, generally speaking, a political speech, which everybody acknowledges the State of the Union is. Now let's contrast that with the 2020 speech by Donald Trump, which you may remember started out with Republicans in Congress shouting 4 more years, 4 more years. Something that seemed entirely inappropriate for a State of the Union speech. But I guess, with Republicans, there are no rules anymore with State of the Union speeches, as we had Marjorie Taylor Greene yelling liar and various others hooting and hollering from the gallery, much to the consternation of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, by the way. But again, here, the Washington Post found 31 things that need to be addressed. Here's one, and this is kind of his typical exaggeration, where he talks about the economy is the best it has ever been. The president can certainly brag about the state of the economy, but he runs into trouble when he repeatedly makes a play for the history books, because it wasn't the best in the world, and it wasn't the best it's ever been. It's been better before. But this is really a minor criticism compared to some of the issues that the Washington Post found with his claims. For example, he talks about, from the instant I took office, I moved rapidly to revive the U.S. economy, enacting historic and record-setting tax cuts. And here, the Washington Post says, Trump constantly claims he passed the biggest tax cut in U.S. history, but that is 4 Pinocchios false. False! That's not anything that they said about Joe Biden's speech. Here they have a relatively minor critique of something that Trump said when he makes a claim about creating new jobs. They point out that job creation under President Barack Obama's last 3 years, 227,000 a month, still exceeds the monthly average of 191,000 a month under Trump. I just bring that up to kind of point that out because we hear that critique a lot about the who's creating more jobs. But really, this is a minor criticism that the Washington Post has. Let's continue on with some of the more extreme issues that they found with his speech. Regarding a claim that Trump made, where he said, in 8 years under the last administration, over 300,000 working-age people dropped out of the workforce. In just 3 years of my administration, 3.5 million people, working-age people, have joined the workforce. And it says right here, as for Trump's math here, we're not able to replicate it. In other words, they tried to come up with what he came up with and couldn't find it. Again, they'd never said anything like that with Joe Biden's speech. Regarding his claim, this is a blue-collar boom, the Washington Post here points out, in the past year, things have gotten grimmer for many blue-collar workers. Here, regarding a claim that Trump made on criminal justice reform, the Washington Post points out that they gave 3 Pinocchios to Trump for this claim. Again, something you don't see anywhere in the reaction to Joe Biden's speech, because he didn't make claims that were simply false the way Donald Trump does. And here, regarding a claim of the 401ks and how the pensions are doing better, the Washington Post points out that there's no evidence of such huge gains, and even though the Census Bureau reports only 32% of Americans are saving for retirement with such plans. Again, pointing out that it's simply not true what he's saying. Here's another good one, and this is a big one when they talk about energy, which has been something that I've talked about repeatedly on this channel here. The notion that a revolution of energy began under the Trump administration is wrong. Again, you didn't see any of that kind of language when we were talking about Joe Biden's speech. Here's another one about energy independence. Quote, this is false, according to the Washington Post. This is strong language. Here's another one, though, where he makes a claim of a certain figure, where he says, before I took office, health insurance premiums had more than doubled in just 5 years. I moved quickly to provide affordable alternatives. Our new plans are up to 60% less expensive. And it says here that Trump often makes this claim, but we have not been able to verify the claim of a 60% reduction in costs. And here, where Trump made the claim, we will always protect patients with pre-existing conditions, they point out that there was an ongoing court case that the Trump administration was pursuing that would have ended these protections. Here he made a claim regarding his border wall, talking about how sturdy it is, when it's been shown that people can cut through the wall with regular saws. Here his claim is, in the Senate, we have confirmed a record number of 187 new federal judges. Again, it's not a record. And here, regarding a claim that Qasem Soleimani directed the December assault and went on to attack U.S. forces in Iraq and was actively planning new attacks, the statement here is that other than Trump's assertion, there is no publicly available evidence that Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani directed the December attacks or that any possible attack was imminent. That's just some of the flavor of the response that the Washington Post had to Trump's speech. So contrast the difference here. 13 claims that might be a little exaggerated or where the numbers might be rounded rather than being exact versus them saying, this is false. We cannot replicate these calculations. There's no publicly available evidence to support that. That's what they're saying about Trump's speech. So next time somebody says that Joe Biden's a liar, but yet they were defenders of Trump, don't buy it. I am tired of hearing from these people about how bad Joe Biden was when they're defenders of Donald Trump. You just can't do it. Listen, if you disagree with some of Joe Biden's policies, that's fine. Critique them, no problem. But let's at least get the facts right and show who's the liar in the White House and who wasn't. And it's clear from what we've gone through now that Joe Biden's the one who's not the liar, and based upon the response that people have given to the speeches, the American people know it. Well, if you want to see another video about how Trump and the MAGA crowd have persistently lied about Joe Biden, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.